Damon leaned back in Father's old leather chair, the one with the worn armrests from decades of Dad's careful hands. My hands, actually. I'd gripped it during countless sleepless nights fixing problems Damon created. He tapped the termination letter against the polished mahogany desk, each tap echoing through the boardroom like a countdown. "You're done here, Lauren," he said, not even looking at me. His smile was sharp, a knife wrapped in silk. Everyone in that room, 12 years of colleagues, people I'd trained, kept their eyes forward. Nobody moved. My throat tightened as humiliation burned beneath my skin, hot and alive. His smirk widened when I didn't respond fast enough. He wanted a reaction. He wanted me to cry, to argue, to give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. I wouldn't give him that. As I gathered my things, a photo of Dad, my grandfather's letter opener, a coffee mug that said, "World's okay, sister." Damon leaned in close. His breath smelled like peppermint gum, the kind he always chewed when he was lying. "Dad wanted a leader, not whatever you are," he whispered, low enough that only I could hear. My jaw clenched so hard I tasted metal. That was the moment everything shifted inside me. Not toward anger exactly, but toward clarity. He didn't understand what he'd just done. He didn't understand that by pushing me out, he'd removed the only person holding his house of cards together. I'd spent 3 years managing the real work while he collected credit. 3 years of watching investors nod at his presentations while I built the foundation they stood on. Now he'd cut me loose. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw a child playing with toys he didn't understand. I walked out of that boardroom without looking back. Not a single tear. Not a word. I heard someone whisper, "She deserved better." The comment hung in the air like smoke. My shoes clicked against the marble floor with perfect rhythm as I moved toward the elevator. Security followed, awkward and uncomfortable. Damon called after me, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Make sure they walk her out." Standard protocol. His voice cracked slightly on the last word. He was already worried. Already unsure. I pressed the elevator button and watched the doors close on his face. In that reflection, I saw myself clearly for the first time in years. Not as the woman who stayed late fixing mistakes. Not as the sister who protected him. Just me. And I was dangerous in ways he couldn't yet imagine. My name is Lauren Whitfield, and I'm 34 years old. For the last 12 years, I've built Whitfield Development from a struggling family business into something real, something solid. But that's not where my story starts. My story starts when I was 7 years old, watching my mother pat Damon's head after he brought home a finger painting. "You're such a dreamer," she'd said, voice full of wonder. When I showed her my math homework, perfect score, every problem solved, she'd nodded and said, "That's nice, honey. Your brother's the creative one. You're the worker." Those words stuck like gum on a shoe. All through childhood, Damon got praise for trying. I got expectations for succeeding. He was the talented one. I was the reliable one. When Dad started grooming us for the business, he took Damon to client meetings and strategy sessions. I got spreadsheets and operational reports. But here's what Dad didn't know. Those spreadsheets were where the real power lived. When Dad died 5 years ago, the will was read in this same boardroom. Damon inherited 55% of the company. I inherited 45% and an office full of problems. Dad's handwritten note to me said only, "You've always been the strong one. Keep us steady." That's when I understood his real plan. He knew I'd keep the company alive no matter what. He knew Damon needed someone stronger than him. So he split the shares. Damon got control, but I got responsibility. For 3 years after Dad died, I buried myself in work. Client contracts, budget reports, safety audits, construction timelines. I walked sites in rain and snow. I negotiated with suppliers at midnight. I fixed Damon's mistakes before anyone noticed them. He attended fancy dinners and gave speeches about our vision. I stayed in the office, making sure that vision didn't collapse by Tuesday. Then Damon learned something dangerous. Power tastes incredible. He started excluding me from meetings, repackaging my strategies as his ideas. During a presentation to our biggest investors, he outlined my 3-year expansion plan while I watched from the back row. Nobody looked at me. Nobody asked questions. That's when I realized the real game wasn't about being smart. It was about being seen. So I stopped being invisible. I arranged my own investor meetings. I documented every project I managed. I made sure people knew my name. Damon noticed. He didn't like it. His response was to undercut me publicly. In meetings he'd say things like, "Lauren's good with details, but big picture strategy needs someone with vision." His eyes would meet the investor's eyes while mine stayed on the table. The staff noticed too. I could see it in how they treated me. With respect when Damon wasn't around, with distance when he was. One evening Damon forgot to tell me about a major client dinner. I wasn't invited. The next morning, in front of everyone, he scolded me for missing it. "These kinds of mistakes could cost us millions," he said, shaking his head like I was a disappointing child. Everyone laughed politely. I smiled too, but inside something broke. Not my spirit, something harder than that broke. It was the part of me that believed in playing fair, in working hard, in trusting that good things happen to good people. That part died right there in the office, and I didn't mourn it. Later that day, I sat alone in my car and made a decision. I was done protecting him. Done covering his mistakes quietly. Done being the safety net that let him fall without consequences. I pulled out my phone and opened my contacts. Supervisors, site directors, contractors. People who knew the real work. People who'd been loyal to Dad. People who were beginning to question Damon. That was the night everything changed inside me. I realized I was dangerous when I moved silently. When I didn't announce my presence. When I simply listened and learned. For years, I tried to win by working harder than everyone else. I thought if I just proved myself, Damon would respect me. If I just fixed enough problems, he'd see my value. But respect doesn't come from hard work. Comes from power. And I'd been sitting on power the whole time. I just hadn't known how to use it. I started calling people. Not Damon's people. The real people. The ones who understood the actual business. A supervisor named Marcus answered my phone call at 9 p.m. "Lauren," he said, and I could hear genuine surprise in his voice. "I was just thinking about you." That's when I asked the question that changed everything. What would you do if Damon wasn't running this company anymore? While I was building connections, Damon was making worse and worse decisions. He pushed for cheap materials to increase profit margins. Accelerated timelines without accounting for quality checks. Cut safety protocols because they slowed down progress. But with me still inside the company, nobody saw the disaster yet. I covered it up instinctively at first, then deliberately. I let small problems become visible. I mentioned concerns in meetings and watched Damon dismiss them. I documented everything. The first major crack appeared on a residential project in the North District. Damon had approved substandard insulation materials to save $30,000. When I discovered this during a routine inspection, I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just incompetence anymore. This was negligence. This could hurt people. I documented the violation with photographs and dates. I created a file on my personal computer, backed up to an encrypted drive. I didn't report it to Damon. I didn't try to fix it quietly like I usually would. I simply let it sit, like a bomb waiting to explode. I also started reaching out to Tyler more frequently, testing his loyalty, seeing if he was ready for what was coming. When Damon fired me, he removed the only person holding his house of cards together. He had no idea, but I knew, and Tyler knew, and soon everyone would know. That afternoon my phone buzzed. Text from James Vaughn, a board member. "We had no idea he was planning that." Another from Patricia Chen, the investment chair. "That's terrible. Are you okay?" I replied to her, "I'm better than okay." And I meant it. For the first time in years, I wasn't spending my energy holding someone else up. I wasn't managing Damon's mistakes or protecting his image. I was free. That realization felt like waking up after 10 years of sleep. My phone rang 20 minutes later. It was Tyler. Everyone here is furious. What happened? I told him the truth. I'd been fired for not being enough of a leader. There was a long pause. Then Tyler said something that made me smile. You want to know what I think? I think you're about to show them what a real leader looks like. 1 week later, I joined Harrison and Associates as a consultant. Not leadership, just a temporary advisory position. Nobody knew about it except Marcus and a handful of others. On the surface, I'd simply disappeared from their radar. But I had a perfect view of everything Damon was doing, everything he was breaking, every mistake he was making. I watched from the outside like a scientist studying an experiment. Took notes. I observed patterns. I learned where the market was moving. Damon had access to resources and reputation. But I had something better. I had the truth about what was happening inside his company, and I had the ears of people who mattered. 3 weeks after I joined Harrison, the first crack appeared. A major municipal contract, the kind that could have secured Whitfield's future, fell through. Damon blamed administrative delays. But the real reason was simpler. The safety audits required for the contract had been skipped. Someone on Damon's team had reported the violations to the city. Not me. One of his own people. Tyler texted me that afternoon. It's falling apart faster than I expected. Half the team is talking about leaving. They know something's wrong. I met Tyler for coffee at a small place near the Harrison offices. He looked exhausted, like someone carrying a weight he never wanted to carry. They're asking me to help cover things up, he said quietly. Damon wants me to create false documentation showing inspections that never happened. I can't do it, Lauren. I won't do it. I reached across the table and grabbed his hand. Then don't, I said simply. Tell the truth. Document everything they're asking you to do. Send it to me. We'll handle the rest. Tyler's eyes filled with tears. What if I lose my job, he asked. You'll find another one, I said. But you can't get your integrity back once it's gone. Trust me, I know. When investors called me asking questions about Whitfield, I didn't trash Damon. I didn't need to. I simply said, I can't speak about internal matters, but I can speak about best practices in project management. I outlined exactly what should happen, how timelines should be structured, why safety protocols exist. By comparison, Damon's approach looked reckless. By comparison, he looked incompetent. My credibility became the knife that cut him. Damon called me at midnight on a Tuesday. His voice cracked when he heard my voice. You're poisoning them against me, he said. Not a question. An accusation based on fear. I was sitting in my apartment, looking out at the city lights, and I felt something between pity and satisfaction. No, I said calmly. You're doing that yourself. I'm just not fixing it anymore. He hung up before breathing. I could picture him sitting in Dad's office, the leather chair too big, the weight of the company finally settling on his shoulders. Felt good. Not in a cruel way. In a clean way. Like justice had a structure and a purpose. That same night, Tyler sent me encrypted files. Documents showing exactly what Damon had asked him to do. False inspection reports. Fabricated timelines. Everything. I spent 3 hours going through them, cataloging each piece of evidence. With these documents in hand, we had enough to bury him. But I didn't act immediately. I waited. I let the pressure build. I let him make more mistakes. Let him dig himself deeper. That was the hardest part. Having the weapon and choosing not to fire it yet. But I'd learned that timing was everything. Strike too early and he'd claim setup. Strike at the right moment and he'd look like he'd done it all to himself. The real twist came when the city audited Whitfield Development's recent projects. They found materials that hadn't passed inspection. Structural problems that should have been caught. Everything Damon had cut corners on came into sharp focus. Local news picked up the story. Developer fails safety inspection. The board immediately launched an investigation. Suddenly, every decision Damon had made was under scrutiny. Every corner-cutting choice was exposed. And people inside the company, they stopped protecting him. They started talking to investigators. They produced documents. They told the truth. I didn't have to do anything but wait. That Saturday morning, I received a call from the newspaper journalist who'd been covering the story. "Lauren," she said, "I have documents showing Damon knowingly approved substandard materials. Can you comment?" I told her the truth. I can't speak to his motives, but I can speak to the safety standards that should have been followed. My name was mentioned in the article as someone who'd previously managed safety protocols. The implication was clear. Under my management, these things didn't happen. The city's investigation deepened. More engineers were brought in. More tests were run. Every layer of neglect was exposed like sediment in stone. Damon panicked. I could see it in news reports where he looked sweaty, defensive. So he did what desperate people do. He made a terrible decision. He partnered with a shady supplier to cut costs even further. The supplier delivered substandard materials. Projects failed inspection. More news stories. More investigations. This time someone asked what Damon was thinking. He couldn't answer. Because he wasn't thinking. He was reacting. And every reaction made things worse. I watched from my desk at Harrison as the chaos unfolded. One afternoon, I received a call from a contractor named Vincent who'd been with Whitfield for 8 years. "Lauren," he said, his voice tight, "Damon is having us falsify inspection reports. I can't do this anymore. I can't be part of this." My heart raced. This was the moment everything crystallized. "What do you mean, falsify?" I asked carefully. Vincent explained that Damon had ordered paperwork to be doctored, showing approvals that never happened. "I have copies," Vincent said. "I kept them because I knew something was wrong." That's when I made a decision that would change everything. I told Vincent to contact the authorities. "Bring the documents," I said. "Tell them everything. This needs to end." Vincent breathed heavily on the other end. "They'll come after me for knowing and not saying something sooner," he said. "I know," I replied. "But you're doing the right thing now. That matters." My director at Harrison pulled me into his office on a Friday. "Lauren," he said, "how would you feel about a permanent position? Director of Development." I had one condition. "We bid for every contract Whitfield Development touches," I said. He smiled like he understood exactly what that meant. We won the first bid. Then the second. Then the third. Contract after contract, my firm won work that Damon was losing. Clients chose us because they remembered me. Because they trusted my work. Because Damon had proven unreliable. Every victory felt clean because it was earned through competence, not revenge. But something unexpected happened. One of our biggest victories came when we bid against Whitfield for a hospital expansion project worth $15 million. The hospital board had worked with us before. They knew our standards. They knew our safety record. When they heard Damon was bidding, one board member actually laughed. "After what we've heard about Whitfield," she said, "we're choosing Harrison without even looking at their proposal." That's when I realized the full scope of what had happened. It wasn't just about winning contracts. It was about Damon's reputation becoming synonymous with failure. People didn't choose us because we were better. They chose us because Damon had become someone nobody wanted to work with. That realization was both satisfying and sobering. Damon tried to fight back. He gave a public statement accusing me of corporate sabotage and deliberately undermining him. It was desperate and obvious. A journalist called me for comment. I gave her an interview, calm and measured. "I wish my family nothing but success," I said. "I'm focused on doing good work and building a company people can trust. I hope Whitfield Development finds a path forward." My words were kind. They made Damon look unhinged by comparison. The article's headline wrote itself. "Family feud takes ugly turn as Whitfield Development struggles." Damon looked like the villain. I looked like the bigger person. But then something happened that I hadn't anticipated. A former employee named Kevin came forward publicly. He worked as a project manager and had quit Whitfield 3 months earlier because he refused to cut corners on a residential complex. In an interview he said, "Damon wanted us to use cheaper materials that we knew wouldn't last. When I objected, he told me I was old school and didn't understand modern business. But I do understand ethics. Lauren would never have asked me to compromise safety. That's the difference." His statement went viral on social media. Other former employees started sharing their stories. A safety officer described how Damon had fired her for raising concerns about a project. An engineer talked about how her designs were implemented correctly under my leadership but completely butchered under Damon's. The narrative shifted completely. Now it wasn't just about Damon's failures. It was about the kind of leader he actually was versus the kind I was. People began to see the contrast not as business competition but as character comparison. 3 months after the safety investigation started, 3 board members visited me at Harrison. They arrived together, which meant it was official. James spoke first. "We want you back," he said. "We want you as CEO. If Damon steps down." I didn't say yes. That was important. Not saying yes immediately. I said, "Only if the employees want it too. Leadership isn't about power. It's about being trusted." The board members looked at each other. They didn't understand that I'd already won. I didn't need their permission or their position. But taking it back the right way with employee support, that would mean something different. That evening I drove to the Whitfield office. I hadn't been there since the day I was fired. Walking through those doors felt strange, like visiting a place from another lifetime. I passed the conference room where Damon had humiliated me. I passed my old office, now occupied by someone else. But instead of feeling angry, I felt peaceful. I was there to listen. I sat down with groups of employees in the break room. Not officially. Just me talking to people who'd worked with me for years. I asked them what they wanted. What would make them believe in the company again? What kind of leadership would matter to them? The answers were consistent. They wanted someone who treated them fairly. Someone who valued their input. Someone who wouldn't steal their ideas. Someone like the Lauren they'd known before. That week, the board conducted anonymous employee surveys. The results were unanimous. In written statements, people begged for my return. A supervisor named Tyler wrote, "Lauren built this company with integrity. She deserves to lead it." A safety inspector wrote, "I trust Lauren with my career. I don't trust Damon with my safety." Another manager wrote, "Please bring her back. We miss having real leadership." A junior architect named Patricia wrote something that hit me hard. "When Lauren was here, I felt like my work mattered. Under Damon, I felt invisible. That's the kind of company I want to work for. One where people matter." The employees had spoken. Their words weren't just supporting my return. They were testifying to a fundamental difference in how I treated people. They weren't choosing me because I'd won some corporate battle. They were choosing me because they remembered what it felt like to work for someone who actually cared about them. That distinction mattered more than any victory ever could. When I read those surveys, I cried for the first time since being fired. Not sad tears. Grateful tears. These people had stayed loyal not because I'd been perfect, but because I'd been real with them. During the next board meeting, Damon showed up confident. He thought he was there to discuss quarterly projections. Instead, he walked into an ambush of facts. The board presented the audit results, the failed contracts, the safety violations, the employee survey results. Damon's face went white. He tried to defend himself, but each explanation sounded worse than the last. Finally, he stood up and slammed his files on the table. "You're all traitors," he screamed. "This was a setup. This is conspiracy." He accused everyone of plotting against him. He stormed out of the room, his voice still echoing down the hallway. The board voted immediately. Unanimously. He was removed. Effective immediately. But the board members didn't look satisfied. They looked tired. They looked like people who'd realized they'd been complicit in something wrong by allowing Damon to stay in power after my father died. As they filed out, James put his hand on my shoulder. "Lauren," he said quietly, "I'm sorry we let it get this far. Your father trusted you with this company. We should have too." I nodded but said nothing. Apologies felt small compared to the damage that had been done. But I accepted them anyway because moving forward required letting people acknowledge their mistakes. Here's where the story takes a turn that shocked everyone, including Damon. The board assumed I'd return as CEO. That's what everyone expected. But I had a different plan. I'd spent 3 months building relationships at Harrison. The company had grown. We were strong. I went to my director and made him an offer. Harrison and Associates would acquire Whitfield Development. Legally. Cleanly. All proper channels. Damon would have no position, no control, no authority. He wouldn't even work there. He'd be a shareholder with no say in operations. The acquisition went through in 4 weeks. But there was a strategic brilliance to this move that even I was only half conscious of at the time. By acquiring Whitfield rather than simply returning to run it, I transformed the narrative. I wasn't coming back as someone who'd been fired. I was coming back as the owner. The entire company would operate under my vision, my standards, my leadership. Damon would have zero say in anything. He'd be a passenger, not even in the car anymore. When I announced the acquisition to Harrison's staff, the room erupted in applause. They understood what this meant. It meant the woman they'd hired on faith had proven herself not just competent, but visionary. It meant she'd taken a struggling company and turned it into a major development firm. It meant she'd done it all while dealing with family betrayal and personal devastation. The board of Whitfield was informed simultaneously. Their relief was visible. They didn't have to choose between Damon and me anymore. The decision had been made by market forces, by legal structures, by the simple mathematics of acquisition. They could tell themselves it was inevitable. I stood in the same boardroom where Damon had fired me. But this time I sat at the head of the table. Damon sat across from me, facing me like a defendant. I slid new terms across the table, papers outlining his severance, his shares, his non-compete agreement. His hands trembled as he read them. "You're destroying me," he whispered. He stayed calm. "No," I said. "I'm simply letting the consequences of your choices catch up with you. There's a difference." He had no leverage, no choices. He signed the papers. But before he left, I wanted him to understand something. "Damon," I said, and he looked up, eyes wet. "I didn't do this to hurt you. I did this because the company matters. Because the people who work here matter. Because my father's legacy matters. And you were destroying all of it." His jaw clenched. "I know," he said quietly. "I've known for a while that I was failing. I just didn't know how to fix it. So I kept making it worse." That moment of honesty surprised me. I'd expected him to fight, to make excuses, to blame me. Instead, he'd admitted something true. "You could have asked for help," I said gently. "You could have told me the pressure was too much. That's what family does." Damon stood up, papers in hand. "That's why I lost," he said. "Because I didn't know how to do that. I still don't. But maybe it's not too late to learn." He walked out, and I didn't know if he meant what he said. But I realized I didn't need to know. His journey was his own now. I could have humiliated him. I could have made a scene or gloated about my victory. Instead, I simply told him the truth. "The empire survived despite you, not because of you. I hope you find a life you can be proud of." Those words hurt him more than any cruel comeback could have. Because deep down, he knew they were true. He knew I'd carried him. He knew that without me he was nothing. And now he'd have to figure out who he was without that invisible support system. He left the building without looking back. I never saw him again. That night I sat alone in the office, my office now, and realized something profound. I'd won, but I hadn't become him. I hadn't become cruel or dismissive or power-hungry. I'd become something better. I'd become the kind of leader who won with integrity. I thought about what my father would have said if he could see me now. I think he would have smiled. Not because I'd defeated Damon, but because I'd stayed true to who I was while doing it. I looked at the leather chair where my father had sat, where Damon had sat, where I now sat. Felt different. Not because it was mine now. Because I'd earned it honestly. Months passed. The company thrived under real leadership. Workers smiled again. Investors became confident. We won contracts based on merit and reputation. I led with integrity, transparency, and grace, the things my father had taught me that I'd almost forgotten. One evening I was alone in my office now, looking out at the city. A junior manager knocked on my door. "Lauren," she said, "I'm starting a family business. I wanted to ask you for advice." I smiled and invited her to sit down. As I talked about building something real, something lasting, I thought about what I'd learned. I told her about the danger of ambition without ethics. I told her about the poison of resentment. I told her about the power of moving quietly and speaking truthfully. But most importantly, I told her something I wished someone had told me. Your success doesn't have to come from someone else's failure. But if someone tries to destroy you, the best response isn't to destroy them back. It's to build something better than they could ever imagine. It's to show them and yourself what you're capable of. That junior manager is building her company now. I'm her advisor. I see in her the same hunger I had at her age. But I'm making sure she learns something I learned the hard way. Revenge doesn't have to be loud. Sometimes the quietest moves shake the earth. Sometimes the greatest victory is simply becoming exactly who you were supposed to be all along. The city lights flickered outside my window. Somewhere out there my brother was starting over. Somewhere. He was learning to be someone other than the boy our mother praised or the man who'd held my company. And me. I was exactly where I belonged. Leading. Building. Growing. Not because I'd beaten him. But because I'd finally stopped trying to prove myself to anyone but myself.